The maintenance bay smelled like oil and burnt metal when Tom Bradley finished replacing the faulty power coupling. His hands were still greasy when he wiped them on his uniform and headed to the cafeteria. The Concordia was a massive research vessel that housed over 3,000 beings from 47 different species, and lunchtime was always chaos. Tom grabbed a ham sandwich from the human food section and found his usual table in the corner. The cafeteria stretched out like a small city, with different sections serving food that wouldn't kill the various alien species aboard. The atmosphere was breathable for most everyone, but the smells were a mixture of familiar earth scents and things that made his nose wrinkle. He pulled out his tablet and started reading about plasma conduit maintenance while he ate. The technical manual was dry as dust, but someone had to keep the ship running. Around him, conversations in dozens of languages created a constant hum of activity. 3 tables over, a group of Valorian warriors were putting on quite a show. The Valorians looked like humans if humans were 8 feet tall, had silver skin, and muscles that belonged in anatomy textbooks. Their culture was built around honor, combat, and traditions that went back thousands of years. Commander Thane was the largest of the 3, with ritual scars covering his arms in intricate patterns. He moved through what looked like a dance, but Tom could see it was actually a fighting form. Each movement flowed into the next with perfect precision. The other 2 Valorians, Warrior Dex and Scout Nera, followed along, demonstrating their own techniques. Other aliens had stopped eating to watch. The bird-like aviacs chirped approval, and even the usually stoic rock creatures called Terrans seemed impressed by the display. The Valorians were showing off their ancient martial art called Kethmar, and they clearly enjoyed being the center of attention. Tom glanced up occasionally but kept reading his manual. The plasma conduits on Deck 7 had been acting up for weeks, and he wanted to understand the theoretical framework before he started tearing things apart. He had learned long ago that preparation prevented most problems. Commander, Thane noticed Tom's apparent lack of interest and his silver skin darkened with annoyance. In Valorian culture, ignoring a martial demonstration was like spitting on their ancestors. The big warrior finished his form and strode over to Tom's table, his boots making heavy sounds on the metal floor. Human, Thane said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. You showed disrespect to the sacred art of Kethmar. Tom looked up from his tablet, chewing thoughtfully on his sandwich. Sorry, what now? The forms of my people demand attention, Thane continued, crossing his massive arms. Your ignorance insults our traditions. The conversations around them started to quiet down as other beings sensed tension brewing. Tom finished chewing and swallowed before responding. I wasn't trying to insult anyone. I'm just eating lunch and reading about plasma conduits. Warrior Dex and Scout Nera had moved closer, flanking their commander. Dex was younger than Thane, but just as imposing, with fresh ritual scars still healing on his chest. Nera was the smallest of the 3, but her movements suggested coiled violence ready to spring. Perhaps the human needs a demonstration of what real combat looks like, Dex suggested, his hand moving to the practice blade at his side. Tom set down his sandwich and really looked at them for the first time. The Valorians were clearly skilled fighters, and their movements had the kind of precision that came from years of training. But there was something else there, something in the way they held themselves that suggested they had never really been challenged. Look, I don't want any trouble, Tom said calmly. I'm just trying to eat my lunch in peace. Commander Thane's eyes narrowed. The coward reveals himself, typical of your soft species. The comment stung a little, but Tom had heard worse. He had grown up in the maintenance tunnels of Luna Station, where you learned to fix things quickly or people died when the life support failed. Being called soft by someone who had never worked a real job wasn't exactly devastating. Tell you what, Tom said, standing up and matching Thane's gaze. What exactly are you suggesting here? A formal challenge, Thane declared loudly enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. You will attempt the basic forms of Kethmar, and when you fail, you will apologize for your disrespect. The cafeteria was getting quieter as more beings stopped their conversations to listen. Tom could see Captain Zendra, a tall Helian with blue skin and diplomatic tattoos, starting to move in their direction. The Helians were the peacekeepers of the coalition, and Zendra wouldn't want trouble on her ship. Tom thought about it for a moment. He had 28 minutes left of his lunch break, and the plasma conduit problem wasn't going anywhere. The Valorians clearly needed to prove something, and maybe it would be easier to just go along with it than cause a scene. "All right, Tom," said, wiping his hands on a napkin. "What are the rules?" Commander Thane blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. "Rules?" "Yeah, rules. How does this work? Do I just copy what you do, or is there some kind of scoring system? Are we talking about a friendly demonstration, or are you planning to actually fight me?" The three Valorians exchanged glances. They had obviously expected Tom to back down or make excuses. The idea that a human would actually accept their challenge seemed to confuse them. "It is a demonstration of forms," Thane said slowly. "No contact, no weapons. You will attempt to replicate the 7 sacred stances of beginning Kethmer. When you fail, the challenge ends." Tom nodded and finished his sandwich in 3 quick bites. "Sounds fair. Let me just clear my table." As he stacked his dishes, Tom could feel the attention of the entire cafeteria focusing on their corner. This was either going to be embarrassing or interesting, and he wasn't entirely sure which one he preferred. Word spread through the cafeteria faster than a hull breach alarm. Beings from every corner of the massive space began gathering around the cleared area near the Valorian table. Tom found himself standing in the center of a circle that included species he had only seen in the technical manuals. The crystalline architects clinked softly as they moved, their translucent bodies refracting light in rainbow patterns. A group of Nomari floated just above the crowd, their tentacles curling with curiosity. Even the ancient Elderkin had paused their eternal meditation to observe, their tree-like forms creaking as they turned attention toward the scene. "Captain." Zendra pushed through the crowd, her blue Helian features showing concern. "Commander Thane, surely this is unnecessary." "Mr. Bradley is a valued member of our crew." The challenge has been accepted," Thane replied formally. "Honor demands completion." Tom stretched his neck and rolled his shoulders. "It's okay, Captain. I'm curious to see what this is all about." Zendra looked between the massive Valorian warrior and the human maintenance worker who barely came up to Thane's chest. "Very well, but this remains a peaceful demonstration. Number contact." Commander Thane moved to the center of the circle and began explaining the 7 sacred stances. His voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition as he described each position. The first stance was called Mountain Root, representing stability and strength. The second was Flowing River, emphasizing fluid movement and adaptation. Tom listened politely while his eyes tracked every detail of Thane's body positioning. The Valorian center of gravity, the angle of his feet, the distribution of weight between his legs. It was like watching a complex machine in motion. And Tom had spent his entire life understanding how machines worked. Thane demonstrated the third stance, called Wind Through Leaves, which required balancing on one foot while extending the other leg and both arms in specific angles. The movement looked elegant and difficult, requiring years of training to achieve the perfect form that Thane displayed. The fourth and fifth stances built on the previous ones, adding rotational elements and transitions that demanded incredible flexibility and muscle control. Tom watched Thane move through positions that would have put most humans in the hospital, all while maintaining perfect balance and form. The sixth stance was called Striking Serpent, a low crouch with arms positioned for either attack or defense. The seventh and final stance, named Soaring Eagle, involved a complex pose with one leg extended, arms spread wide, and the head tilted at a precise angle to maintain equilibrium. Each stance must be held for 10 seconds with perfect form, Thane explained, settling back into his starting position. The transitions must be smooth and controlled. Most Valorian children require months to achieve even the basic positions. The crowd murmured appreciation for the display. Tom nodded thoughtfully and checked his watch. He had been observing for exactly 3 minutes and 27 seconds. "I think I get it," Tom said. Stepping forward into the circle, he moved into the first stance, mountain route, but something was different. Where Thane's version had been solid and impressive, Tom's modification was somehow more efficient. His stance was lower, his center of gravity perfectly balanced, and his posture conveyed strength without the unnecessary tension that had marked the Valorian's demonstration. The crowd stirred with surprise. Tom flowed into the second stance. Flowing river, and again his version was subtly improved. The movement was smoother, more natural, as if he had found a more direct path between the positions. "How are you doing this?" Scout Nero whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and disbelief. Tom continued through the third stance, wind through leaves, balancing effortlessly in a position that had taken him seconds to achieve rather than the months of training it should have required. It's basically physics and leverage, right? With some kinesthetic pattern recognition. He moved into the fourth stance, and then something unexpected happened. Instead of simply copying what Thane had shown, Tom began performing variations that shouldn't have existed. He flowed through positions that combined elements from multiple stances, creating transitions that were more complex but somehow easier to execute. The fifth stance became a platform for Tom to demonstrate concepts that the Valorians had never considered. He showed how the same basic principles could be applied with greater efficiency, how the ancient forms could be optimized for better results with less energy expenditure. Warrior Dex stepped forward, his young face showing confusion and growing concern. "This is impossible. You cannot master forms that took our ancestors generations to perfect." Tom moved into the sixth stance, striking serpent, but his version incorporated elements that looked like they belonged in advanced Kethmar curricula. "I'm not really mastering anything. I'm just seeing the patterns underneath." The seventh stance, soaring eagle, should have been the culmination of the demonstration. Instead, Tom used it as a launching point for something entirely new. He flowed through positions that seemed to evolve the entire martial art in real time, showing where the forms wanted to go next in their development. The cafeteria had fallen, completely silent except for the gentle hum of the ship's life support systems. Tom finished in a stance that didn't have a name, a position that somehow felt like the natural conclusion to everything that had come before. He straightened up and brushed imaginary dust off his maintenance uniform. "Sorry, got a little carried away there. The underlying structure is really elegant once you see how it all fits together." Commander Thane's silver skin had gone pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he stared at the human. In Valorian culture, what they had just witnessed was supposed to be impossible. Their sacred martial art, developed over millennia of careful refinement, had just been deconstructed and improved by an outsider in less than 10 minutes. "This cannot be," Thane whispered, his voice barely audible above the ship's background. "Noise." Tom checked his watch again. "I've still got about 20 minutes left on my lunch break. Was there anything else you wanted to show me?" The silence stretched uncomfortably as Commander Thane struggled to process what he had witnessed. His entire worldview, built on centuries of Valorian tradition, had just been casually dismantled by a human maintenance worker during lunch break. The other Valorians looked equally stunned, their silver skin showing the pale flush that indicated deep emotional disturbance. Warrior Dex stepped forward, his young face set in determined lines. "The basic forms are only the beginning," he declared, his voice carrying desperate authority. "True Kethmar requires weapons mastery. The sacred art of Valthara has never been learned by outsiders." Tom looked genuinely interested. "Weapon forms? That sounds more complex. What kind of weapons are we talking about?" Dex moved to a nearby wall display and retrieved a traditional Valorian blade staff. The weapon was beautiful in its alien functionality. A curved blade mounted on a staff that was perfectly balanced for both sweeping strikes and precise thrusts. The metal had an odd shimmer that suggested it was made from materials not found on Earth. "The Valthara requires perfect harmony between warrior and weapon," Dex explained, moving into a ready position. "The blade staff becomes an extension of the body, moving with the fighter's intent rather than conscious direction." He began a demonstration that was even more impressive than the unarmed forms. The weapon moved through the air in patterns that seemed to defy physics, spinning and striking in combinations that created a deadly web around the young Valorian. His movements were fluid and precise, each position flowing into the next with practiced ease. Tom watched intently, his maintenance-trained eye tracking the weapon's balance point and the subtle ways. Dex adjusted his grip to compensate for the changing dynamics. The blade staff was clearly a precision instrument designed to work with Valorian physiology and fighting concepts. "The weapon chooses the warrior," Scout Nira added softly. "In our culture, a blade staff that accepts a fighter will sing during combat. One that rejects its wielder will fight against every movement." Dex completed his demonstration and offered the weapon to Tom. "No outsider has ever made a blade staff sing. Your species lacks the spiritual connection necessary for true Velthara." Tom accepted the weapon and immediately frowned. He hefted it experimentally, testing its weight distribution and balance characteristics. "This is really well made, but the grip balance is off for human anatomy. Mind if I make a quick adjustment?" Before anyone could object, Tom pulled a multi-tool from his maintenance kit and began making small modifications to the weapon's grip. He adjusted the wrapping, altered the balance point slightly, and made tiny changes that seemed insignificant but fundamentally altered how the weapon handled. The Valorians watched in horror. To them, Tom was desecrating a sacred object, violating traditions that went back to the founding of their civilization. Several other aliens in the crowd muttered disapproval at what appeared to be casual vandalism of a cultural artifact. "There we go," Tom said, testing the modified weapon with a few experimental swings. "Much better balance for human proportions." He moved into a ready position that looked similar to what Dex had demonstrated, but with subtle differences that accounted for human anatomy and leverage. Then he began the Velthara forms, and the impossible happened again. The blade staff moved through the air with liquid precision, but Tom wasn't just copying what he had seen. He was demonstrating techniques that incorporated multiple schools of Valorian weapon work, including combinations that existed only in ancient texts that most modern Valorians had never studied. More impossibly, the weapon was singing. The blade vibrated with harmonic frequencies that created an otherworldly music, the traditional sign that weapon and warrior had achieved perfect unity. But Tom was going beyond even that, demonstrating forms that seemed to evolve the art in real time. "By the ancestors," Scout Nira whispered, her voice filled with religious awe. "He moves like the ancient masters." Tom flowed through sequences that combined elements from different weapon disciplines, showing how the same principles that governed the unarmed forms applied to armed combat. He demonstrated efficiency improvements and tactical modifications. That should have taken generations of masters to develop. The crowd had grown larger as word spread through the ship. Representatives from dozens of species pressed forward to witness what was happening. The crystalline architects chimed in harmony with the singing blade staff, and even the normally reserved elderkin were showing visible signs of interest. Commander Thane's face had gone through several color changes, finally settling on a shade that Tom had never seen on Valorian skin before. "This is not possible," he repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Tom completed a complex series that incorporated advanced Velthara principles with innovations that felt like natural evolution of the art. The blade staff song reached a crescendo before settling into satisfied silence. "The weapon sings with joy," Nira said quietly. "In our oldest texts it is written that when the ancient masters weep with joy, the art has found new life." Other aliens in the crowd began calling out requests. A group of Christic warriors wanted to demonstrate their geometric fighting patterns. The Nomari were offering to show their zero-gravity combat techniques. Representatives from the Elderkin were suggesting their meditative battle dance that supposedly took lifetimes to master. Tom looked around at the eager faces and checked his watch. "I've still got 15 minutes left." "Sure, let's see what you've got." He handed the modified blade staff back to Warrior Dex, who accepted it with something approaching reverence. The young Valorian tested the weapon's new balance, and his eyes widened with surprise at how much more natural it felt. "How did you know to make those changes?" Dex asked quietly. Tom shrugged. "Same way I know how to fix plasma conduits." You look at how something works, figure out what it's supposed to do, and then optimize it for the job. The Christic stepped forward first, their translucent bodies reflecting light in complex patterns. We would be honored to share the geometric path with you, human Tom. As the alien warriors began arranging themselves for their demonstration, Tom settled back to observe with the same careful attention he had given the Valorians. Around the cafeteria, other beings whispered in their native languages about what they were witnessing. Captain Zendra stood at the edge of the crowd, making notes on her personal tablet. In her official log, she was going to have to explain how. A maintenance worker had just revolutionized several species. Understanding of combat arts during his lunch break. The demonstration was far from over. The Christic moved like living mathematics, their translucent bodies shifting through geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Their fighting style was called the geometric path, based on angular precision and mathematical perfection. Each movement created perfect lines and angles, building complex three-dimensional shapes in the air. Tom watched as three Christic demonstrated their art, their bodies clicking softly as crystalline joints moved through calculated positions. Their forms were beautiful in an alien way, like watching equations solve themselves through physical motion. Our art is based on universal mathematical principles, explained the lead Christic, whose name sounded like wind chimes in a storm. Each form represents geometric perfection achieved through millennia of refinement. The demonstration lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, timed with mathematical precision. When they finished, Tom stepped forward and began replicating their movements, but with modifications that made the angles more efficient and the transitions smoother. Interesting, Tom said, as he flowed through a sequence that combined multiple geometric patterns into something new. You're working with three-dimensional space, but you're limiting yourselves to static geometry. What if you treated it like dynamic engineering instead? He demonstrated forms that incorporated concepts of structural load distribution and mechanical advantage, turning the Christic's mathematical precision into something that looked like applied physics. The Christic watched with fascination as their ancient art evolved before their eyes. Next came the Nomari, floating above the crowd on undulating tentacles. Their zero-gravity combat techniques were fluid and unpredictable, designed for fighting in three-dimensional space without fixed reference points. They moved like dancers in a medium that didn't exist, their bodies rippling through positions that defied gravity. Tom observed their demonstration with intense concentration, noting how they used momentum and angular motion to control their movement through space. When they finished, he asked to borrow a small anti-gravity generator from the ship's equipment locker. Zero-gravity fighting is just orbital mechanics with attitude, Tom explained as he activated the device and rose slowly off the floor. You use conservation of angular momentum and Newton's laws to control motion. His demonstration of Nomari techniques incorporated principles of spacecraft maneuvering and momentum transfer that turned their flowing art into something more systematic and predictable. The Nomari chittered with excitement as they recognized improvements that would revolutionize their combat effectiveness. The Elderkin came next, their ancient tree-like forms creaking as they moved through their meditative battle dance. Their art was supposedly spiritual rather than physical, focusing on inner harmony and connection with universal forces. The demonstration took nearly 10 minutes and looked more like slow-motion Tai Chi than actual combat. Tom watched patiently, recognizing patterns that reminded him of mechanical resonance and harmonic frequency. When the Elderkin finished, he moved through their forms while explaining the underlying principles. This is really sophisticated biofeedback control, Tom said as he flowed through positions that looked effortless despite their complexity. You're using controlled breathing and muscle tension to optimize your nervous system response time. It's like tuning a precision instrument. By the time he finished demonstrating improvements to the Elderkin techniques, representatives from 5 more species had lined up to show their fighting arts. Tom was running out of lunch break, but the aliens seemed desperate to share their cultures with someone who could understand and appreciate their traditions. The crowd had grown to include nearly a quarter of the ship's population. Beings who normally never interacted were standing side by side, watching a human maintenance worker casually master and improve combat arts that their species had developed over thousands of years. "How are you doing this?" Commander Thane asked quietly. The big Valorian had been watching everything with growing amazement and something that might have been respect. Tom paused in his demonstration of Terran rock fighting techniques to consider the question. "Humans don't really have ancient martial arts like you do," he said, moving through positions that treated the rocky Terran forms like applied geology. "We had to figure out fighting from scratch over and over in different places and times." He gestured to the crowd of aliens around them. "Every human culture developed its own fighting methods, usually independently. Boxing, wrestling, sword fighting, staff work, empty hand techniques. We've been reverse engineering combat for thousands of years." Tom completed a sequence that combined elements from all 8 alien fighting styles he had observed, creating something that looked like the theoretical foundation that underlay all martial arts. "So I guess we got good at seeing the fundamental principles that make any fighting system work." The aliens exchanged glances, beginning to understand what they were witnessing. This wasn't supernatural ability or mysterious human magic. It was systematic thinking applied to combat, the same analytical approach that humans use to solve engineering problems and scientific challenges. "You approach our sacred arts like mechanical systems," Scout Mira observed, her voice showing a mixture of fascination and mild offense. "Everything is a mechanical system if you think about it right," Tom replied cheerfully. "Bodies are biological machines, weapons are tools for force multiplication, and fighting is just applied physics with emotional complications." He demonstrated a combination technique that incorporated principles from every martial art he had seen, flowing through movements that suggested a unified theory of combat. "The amazing thing is how similar all your fighting systems are underneath. You're all working with the same basic physical laws and biological constraints." Around the cafeteria, alien warriors began discussing what they had witnessed. The implications were staggering. If combat arts could be understood as applied science rather than mystical traditions, then everything they thought they knew about fighting needed to be reconsidered. Tom checked his watch and realized his lunch break was almost over. "I hate to cut this short, but I need to get back to work. Those plasma conduits on deck 7 aren't going to fix themselves." The crowd of aliens looked disappointed, but several representatives approached him with formal requests. Commander Thane wanted to discuss making Tom an honorary Kethmer master. The Christic offered to share their mathematical combat databases. The Nomari invited him to train with their elite zero-gravity fighters. Tom listened politely to each offer, but declined them all with friendly explanations about his existing duties and responsibilities. Tom gathered his empty lunch tray and napkins while representatives from a dozen alien species surrounded him with increasingly elaborate offers. The Valorians wanted to make him a Grand Master of Kethmer, a title that had never been given to an outsider in their 1,000-year history. The Christic offered him a position as primary geometric theorist, complete with his own research laboratory and unlimited resources. "You could revolutionize combat theory across the entire galaxy," urged the lead Christic, their crystalline body chiming with excitement. "Your systematic approach could advance our understanding by centuries." The Nomari were offering to make him their first non-tentacled combat philosophy advisor, while the Elderkin wanted to establish a new school of martial arts based on his demonstrations. Even species that hadn't shown their fighting styles were making proposals, hoping to get his insights into their own combat traditions. Tom listened politely to each offer, but shook his head with genuine regret. "I appreciate all the honors, I really do. But I have a job to do, and people are counting on me to keep this ship running." Commander Thane stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the human. "Tom Bradley, you have shown mastery that surpasses our greatest warriors. Surely maintaining machineries beneath someone of your abilities." "That's where you're wrong," Tom said, stacking his dishes on his tray with practiced efficiency. "Maintaining machinery is exactly what I'm good at. Combat arts are interesting, but I'm really more of a mechanical systems guy." He gestured around. The cafeteria, indicating the subtle signs of the ship's constant operation. See, fighting and fixing things aren't that different when you think about it. You observe the system, understand the underlying structure, then apply the right pressure in the right place to get the result you want. Scout Nira tilted her head, her silver features showing confusion. But surely mastering the combat arts of 8 species in 20 minutes demonstrates abilities that transcend mere technical knowledge. Tom considered this while wiping down his table area. Not really. Every human learns to reverse engineer complex systems because we have to. We don't get handed ancient traditions that work perfectly. We have to figure out why things work and then make them work better. He pulled out his maintenance tablet and showed them a diagnostic screen covered with technical readouts. Right. Now, the plasma conduits on Deck 7 are showing harmonic resonance that suggests a coupling misalignment. If I don't fix it, we could lose power to the entire forward section. The alien stared at the incomprehensible technical data while Tom scrolled through maintenance protocols with the same casual competence he had shown with their martial arts. Every system has patterns, Tom continued, closing the tablet and checking his watch. Whether it's ancient Valorian combat forms or plasma conduit maintenance, the principle is the same. You learn to see how things are supposed to work, and then you make them work that way. Captain Zendra approached through the crowd, her blue Helian features showing a mixture of amusement and concern. Mr. Bradley, I've been observing your demonstration. Perhaps we should discuss reassigning you to our cultural exchange program. Thanks, Captain, but I like my current assignment, Tom replied. Besides, someone needs to keep the lights on while everyone else is doing important diplomatic stuff. He started walking toward the cafeteria exit, but paused when he noticed the Valorian blade staff that Warrior Dex was still holding. The weapon was humming softly, its modified grip showing the small changes Tom had made. You might want to adjust your other training weapons the same way, Tom suggested to Dex. The balance modifications will work better with standard Valorian anatomy once you account for the leverage differences. Dex looked down at the weapon with new understanding. This blade staff feels more natural than any I have ever wielded. How did you know what changes to make? Same way I know when a plasma coupling is about to fail, Tom said with a shrug. You listen to what the system is telling you and respond accordingly. As he walked away, the crowd of aliens remained clustered around the tables, discussing what they had witnessed in a dozen different languages. The implications of Tom's casual demonstration were staggering for species that had built their cultures around the mystical nature of combat mastery. Tom disappeared around a corner already, thinking about the diagnostic procedures he would need to run on the failing plasma conduits. Behind him, representatives from dozens of species frantically took notes and debated whether humans were terrifying or wonderful. The Christic were recalculating their geometric principles based on Tom's modifications. The Namari were discussing how dynamic engineering could revolutionize zero-gravity combat. The Elderkin were quietly meditating on the implications of treating spiritual disciplines as biofeedback systems. Commander Thane stood holding the modified blade staff, testing its improved balance while his worldview continued to shift around him. Captain, he said to Zendra, perhaps humanity's application to join the Galactic Defense Corps should be given priority consideration. Zendra made a note in her personal log while watching Tom's retreating figure. In her report, she would have to explain how a maintenance worker had accidentally revolutionized several species' understanding of combat theory during his lunch break, then declined all offers of advancement because he preferred fixing plasma conduits. Down in the maintenance bay, Tom was already pulling diagnostic equipment from storage lockers. The failing plasma conduits were showing the same kind of systematic problems he had observed in the alien martial arts. Inefficient energy transfer, harmonic resonance issues, and design limitations that could be improved with the right modifications. He whistled softly while he worked, the same unconscious tune that had accompanied his movements during the martial arts demonstration. Around him, the ship's mechanical systems hummed with the complex rhythms of thousands of interlocking components, each one performing its designated function in the greater symphony of space travel. In the cafeteria, the Valorian weapons still hummed faintly from his touch, as if they remembered being wielded by someone who truly understood their purpose. The sound carried a harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate with the ship's own mechanical heartbeat, creating a subtle music that most beings couldn't consciously hear but somehow felt in their bones. Tom Bradley, maintenance worker second class, continued his shift with the same quiet competence that had impressed alien warriors and would keep 3,000 beings alive in the hostile environment of deep space. To him, it was all just part of the job.